Hi, and welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm your host, Karen Allen, and this is the show that takes a closer look at the individuals and the organizations that make this community worth talking about. Today, we're going to be talking to licensed counselor Kathleen, and she's going to be sharing with us some very important information about grief, the grieving process, and so much more. Stay with us. Talk of the Town. We'll be right back.
There's a monster in my bed.
Even innocent things can trigger an asthma attack. Learn more at noattacks.org.
Please make the monsters go away.
We can all be energy savers. It's easy. Turn off lights. Use energy-saving light bulbs. And turn off electronics and appliances when not in use. Make a change and we can really fly. Learn more at energy.gov/kids.
This can't be happening. This can't be happening.
Of course it's not happening. Armored car. Listen, having money isn't about luck. Make your own coffee, save $1,000 a year. Feed me. Feed the pig.
Lead paint poisoning affects over 1 million children today. If your home was built before 1978, your kids could be at risk. Log on to leadfreekids.org or call 800-424-LEAD.
Welcome back to Talk of the Town. I'm Karen Allen. I'm here with Kathleen, the owner and counselor at Family Solutions Counseling. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, listen, I don't know if you noticed, but this is not my normal gear for a Talk of the Town, but I'm wearing a shirt in honor of my friend who passed away in a tragic accident at the beginning of August. His name was Matt Keeling. The shirt says "Love Big" because that's what he did. He's just a great man. He leaves behind a precious family, Amy, Levi, and Sydney. And so my church community, our friends, we experienced this loss. It was, sudden and tragic. And I started finding myself, okay, well, how do we get through this? Like, I've had grandparents die and things like that. But I think that this is different. It was different for me. It was different for a lot of my friends. And so you came to mind because it leads us to a conversation that's hard to have, but very important about grief and grieving. And so I kind of wanted to start off the conversation by saying, we often think of grief and sorrow with a death, but let's talk quickly about what other types of loss can people have that would bring forth grieving.
There's different times that people grieve through their lives, and I think you're right. People don't think in terms of going through a grief process when they've had other losses. And the other losses are times when someone's lost a pregnancy. So having couples go through the grieving process together to help them through a miscarriage. Times when people get divorced, when they have major life transitions, when they are retired, when they go through retirement. People usually think, oh, that's a joyful time for everyone, but the person going through that process actually does go through a grieving process as their life changes, and they have to develop a new life based on new information. When people's pets die, that's a grieving process, and oftentimes, especially when people don't have pets, it's hard for them to fathom that somebody's going to go through a grieving process, but we all do.
Oh yeah, I sobbed for 3 days straight when my dog died. So I mean, I understand that too. But I think it's good just for our viewers to get kind of a grasp about it's not, grief and loss. It's a loss of any type, a death of a relationship, or there's so much more to that than just, a death of someone. And I think that that's good to touch on. But let's talk about when especially for where we are, and I say we as in my family, my church family, but when we experience grief like that and a tragedy, what kinds of symptoms are associated with grief? Because I know that there are things that come alongside that. So what are some symptoms that are associated with grief?
Well, you have different ones. So you have physical symptoms, and then you also have the emotional symptoms. So physically, people are in shock. They tend to not eat. They change their appetite patterns. So they either eat more or they eat less. They have sleep issues. So they're either going to be sleeping a lot more or sleeping a lot less. They physically, when they're in that shock stage, are not even thinking of taking care of themselves physically. So that's where those care calendars and having a support group is so important. So people can literally just bring people food, make sure they're getting something in their system. Emotionally, people are in that fog. They're lost. They're questioning their faith. They're questioning what's happening. And so they need a lot of guidance and support to get through the anger, to get through all of the pain that they're going through.
And would you say that people experience grief differently as far as, I mean, I like how you said you either eat too much or you don't eat at all, or there's this pendulum, but people do, it's not one way or the other. I mean, it's just different for each person. Would you say that?
It is. And everyone's going to go through the different stages of grief, but it's a fluid process. So they're going to come in and out of different phases. They're going to do them at different times. Things are going to last longer for one person that might be shorter for someone else. So it is different for everyone. So for supporters, what they need to do is find out, what is this individual person going through? How are they experiencing the loss? And then that will help guide them on how they can help them the most.
That's so important. We often hear about the stages of grief. Explain that process.
So that process is 5 different things that everyone's going to go through. So there's denial and shock in the beginning, and that's where you see people in a fog, not being able to even fathom that the loss has just occurred. And then they have the anger phase. So as that reality starts to set in, they start to get angry. During that phase, people are often wanting to sometimes retaliate, somehow try to get revenge sometimes, or try to make themselves feel better. So it's important for supporters to help keep them grounded in reality and what's going to be healthy during that phase, because that surge of energy, they want to do something with it. After that, you have the bargaining phase, and that's where people really start to feel sometimes the survivor's guilt. They start to question, what if I had heard some symptoms? What if I had been the one at that location instead of that person? How can I reverse time? Can I go back and somehow change something? And then once that starts to set in, that you can't change reality, that's when depression starts to seep through. And this is the longest phase. So depression is normal during grief. It's supposed to happen. If it didn't happen, that would be a problem. And that's important for people to remember, because people get worried if they're sad for too long, or if they're not eating enough for too long, they worry, what if I get major depression? Does this mean I need medication? Does this mean there's something wrong with me? But it doesn't during grief. It has to happen. You have to go through that pain to get to the other side. And oftentimes the depression won't even start to happen until months and months after the loss has occurred. So that throws supporters off, because they think, okay, we're going to have our care calendar, we're going to take care of everyone, and then 2 months down the road, everybody else has seemingly moved on. And they don't realize the depression isn't going to soak in maybe for 6 months, 8 months. At the year anniversary of the loss, they need to be surrounded by supporters again. And as that starts to fade away, which it will, there's going to be an upward turn, and then we start to move into acceptance. And that's where we're recreating our new reality, where we're making new beginnings, where people start to realize they can survive, they do need to make a new life for themselves. And that's when they start to do more of the self-care. So that's when they're able to start really taking care of their bodies physically, doing self-soothing, and paying attention to themselves more.
What a process. It is, to me, simply amazing to hear what a person will go through from kind of A to Z, just how that process happens, and kind of no matter how it shows itself, it's the same principle.
Right.
It really is. I think the thing that kind of stuck out to me the most is the depression part, because as a supporter, I think that that's where my alarm would go off. You know, they're depressed. They're not supposed to be depressed. How, you know, I don't want them to be depressed. But that's an important part of that healing process. I mean, I like how you said if they're not depressed, that's something that's something to be worried about.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard as you see someone go through that process. But know that process is normal, and there is an end to that process.
Right. We all get through that process, but it's something that we have to wade through to get to the other side.
In your conversations with folks who are dealing with grief, do they ever do you have any insight on, you know, what stage is the hardest for some people? Do they give you those insights? Like what seems to be the one that I didn't expect that one to be that hard? Are there any insights that you've been given?
I think what's hardest for people changes depending on the situation. So if, for instance, if there was a teenager who committed suicide, then a lot of people are going to get stuck in that phase of bargaining and trying to figure out, are there symptoms I missed? Could I have done something differently? So depending on what the circumstances seems to be where people tend to get stuck in different spots. I think the depression phase scares people because they don't want to think they could be depressed, and they don't want to think it's never going to go away, it's never going to end. And since it's the longest phase, that's the hardest, I think, for people to wade through.
What are some symptoms of depression? Like, how would somebody know, okay, this is where I am? Like, this is the place I am, and yes, I know I'm going to get out. But what are some symptoms to kind of give us a heads up?
So the symptoms of depression that are normal for a grieving person would be, again, the change in appetite, the change in sleep patterns, having the fogginess where it's hard to make strategic decisions, where your thoughts are not coming back to you, you can't recall things very well. Day-to-day survival skills sometimes have waned, and it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. But again, those are temporary if it's part of the normal grieving process. And then if it lasts too long, so it lasts months, if it's chronic and isn't going away, if you find that you're stuck in one of the stages, that's when you want to get further help with that.
And that kind of leads us into the next question. When should someone get help in dealing with grief? Because we know it's a process and everybody's different, and there's all these variables to grief. So what is the sign? What are the signs that someone needs to go get help?
If anybody gets stuck in one of the phases, and if being stuck changes the way that you function through life, that's when you want to get help. So if you find that you're chronically not able to function, if you are still stuck in the denial phase and can't move on to even the anger phase, then that's important, because you need to be in reality, you need to be in the moment to be able to continue getting through the process. And again, with the depression, if you get stuck there, then the warning signs would be if you start to self-medicate. So if you start drinking too much, if you turn to drugs, prescription medications, if you find that you're sleeping way too much, then you want to get help. If you're not sleeping enough, what they've found is that taking sleeping medication may help occasionally, but you don't want to start doing that on a regular basis because you may be setting yourself up for getting addicted to that medicine. And they found that antidepressants and sleep medicines are not effective for a grieving person because they need to go through that process. So temporarily it may take the edge from that, but you don't want to depend on that. So if you find you're becoming dependent on other pieces to help you, that's when you want to get some extra help.
Which is so important. And I think I think what is freeing about this conversation is to let someone know it's okay to go get help. If you are stuck in a spot that you just can't get over that hump, if you're in that grieving process, I mean, it says nothing about you other than you could use help. Like, that's right. You know what I mean? So it's okay to go get that help, especially if you're stuck. Well, I'm excited. We have a whole nother segment to talk about more of the grieving process and what it looks like and how it can affect us. So thanks for joining us and sticking around. Okay. We'll be back in just a minute with more Talk of the Town.
explore new worlds. Read. Visit literacy.gov.
Hey, how's it going?
Sir, are you okay?
What? Oh, this? It's probably nothing. I'm sure it'll go away.
Go away? But, sir, that can't be good.
No, it's cool, really.
Do you want a napkin or something?
Everything's fine. Thanks.
You wouldn't ignore this. So why ignore the signs of a stroke? At the first warning signs, call 911 immediately. Because time lost is brain lost.
Hey.
Ready to go?
Yeah, but the fire's not out.
It's close enough.
Huh. Close enough? If it's too hot to touch, it's too hot to leave. I mean, the next thing you know, you've torched our whole neighborhood.
Which is why we're not going anywhere?
Exactly. 9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back to Talk of the Town. I'm Karen Allen, and I'm returning with Kathleen Shack, who is the owner and counselor at Family Solutions Counseling. We're going to continue our conversation on grief and the grieving process, which I think, as we stated at the very beginning of this, whether it is a loss of a person, a loss of a relationship, there are so many losses that we all face, and we don't get out of this life without facing those losses. And so it's so important to have good knowledge and a good understanding of what we can do to get through. So let's talk about how should people cope with loss as they experience grief?
I think what's important is that we take care of ourselves, which is very difficult when we're grieving, but the last thing we're thinking about is how to take care of ourselves. So that's where supporters come in, and they can be helping them have meals to eat. They can be helping just be there as support, be there as listeners. And so we need to take care of ourselves physically, remembering to actually eat something, even if it's small little snacks throughout the day, even if all our stomach will manage is some fruit every now and then, to get in something that we can, to try to get sleep. So it's going to be very rare to get a full night's sleep, but taking little cat naps throughout the day, or as long as you get an hour or two at a time, it's refreshing and it gives your body the physical energy it needs to get through this process. So those are very important. Making sure that we're not turning into any kind of substances to get through it, making sure we're not trying to numb out in that way. And then emotionally, looking at ways that we can help ourselves start to feel better and start to heal. So we found that using the creative side of us helps do that. So the more that people can write and the more that they can journal, or the more artwork they can do, either as an expression of what they're going through or also as a keepsake. So if they go back through and look at photo albums, or if they go through and start to make a scrapbook for themselves or for their children to remember that person by, then that is crucial. That's very healing. If they start to write their own music or write their own poetry, or just find supportive music, so maybe some of their friends could look for uplifting songs to record a CD for them or something, then that really helps.
That's really good. I like the idea of that creative side coming out, because that's what it does, is it releases what's on the inside. And that's the point, is just, to be able to release that, whatever's on the inside gets to come out. Very, very healing. One of the things for me personally, a very tough aspect of grief, and I'm sure it is with other folks too, is when a child grieves. When we come across a situation and we're watching children go through a loss of a parent or grandparent, what are some things that we should know when dealing with kids as they grieve?
The most important thing is to realize they're going through those same grief stages as the adults are. So they're going to be in shock, and for them the shock phase may last longer than another phase. and they're going to go through the bargaining. They're going to wonder if there's something else that could have been done. Could somebody have saved my parent, or could the doctors have done something different for my grandparent? They're going to go through the depression phase, and I think that really scares family, because when they see children going through anything that looks like depression, they get nervous. So knowing that it's okay, they need to go through that pain and that struggle, but watching out for warning signs, helping them get through that process is important. And then they're going to start moving into the acceptance phase and start trying to figure out, okay, how do I function without this other person in my life, or without my pet in my life? Or if it's a divorce, how do I start functioning with two homes instead of the family that I knew, and how I define that family? So just knowing they go through all those same stages is really important, and helping them know it's okay, whatever they're feeling is okay, and whatever they're feeling is normal. And they will have people around them who can listen to them and be there for them, and just be a sounding board, somebody they can vent to. People don't have to try to fix it for the kids. They just need to listen.
I think that's huge, because we're fixers, especially, you know, I'm a fixer, I'm a mama, that's what we do. And so to watch kids go through this, you do want to fix it.
Right.
But there isn't a fix to this.
No, because they have to wade through all the same stages that everyone else does. And they need to see the adults around them experiencing the grief as well. So you want to let them see people cry. You want to let them see people going through the different stages in the process, because that also helps them see people come out on the other side. People will get through this, and people will survive and find a new way to define their life, and a new way, new roles to have, things like that.
And that gives them hope. Yeah, and what you're talking about with that's the new normal that they're going to have to settle into and find, that new normal of what my life looks like now. What would you say, what would be some tips to a parent if, let's say they lost their spouse and they have more than one child, and each child seems to be handling this grief differently? Maybe they have different ways of dealing with it. How, as a parent, what are some ways that they could help?
It's very common for kids to go through grief completely differently. So you're right, the challenge is when they're in the same household, how do we balance that? So finding balance is important, which is also going to be hard for the parent, because chances are that parent is also going through a grieving process. So finding the language that each child needs, and then finding ways to meet that. So if you have one child who wants to know a lot of details, then finding a space for that child to explore those details, either with you or with a family friend or with someone from church or through a grief support group, through individual counseling, is very important. And the more that child talks through it and actually has more information and can process that, that's their healing process. For some reason, that child needs all those details to make sense of their world. And then if you have a child who starts to close in and withdraw, then finding another outlet for that child. If they don't want to talk, then again, go to that creative outlet. Start having them draw pictures. Have them maybe doing a memory book, making a scrapbook. Have that child start just writing in a journal. It doesn't have to be anything specific. Just whenever they want to write anything down or draw a picture in it, just do it. It doesn't have to make any sense. Something is going to be an outlet for that child to somehow start to express what they're going through. So it's just finding a way to tap into that.
Which is, that's tough. Like you said, they're in the same household.
Yeah.
You know, as a parent, you're expecting kind of them to go through the same things at the same time, but that's not necessarily true.
Right. Even the stages can be at all different times.
Yeah.
And just having to find that.
That's really, really tough. One of the things that you've talked a lot about is supporters. You call them supporters. And one thing I'd like to talk about is for us supporters who we really don't have a clue, like maybe we just feel like we're a dunce in this. We feel like, you know, we don't have knowledge, we don't have understanding on how to best help our friends that are going through this. What would you say to folks like us who we want to help, we want to do, you know, we don't want to do the wrong thing, but we don't know what the wrong thing is. What are some clues and some things that we can kind of plug into?
I think it's important to just gain information as quickly as possible. So finding out, again, what are the stages of grief, some of what we've talked about today. You can find lots of great information online. There's wonderful support websites now that give supporters actual tips on things they could do and gives them different avenues that they could try to reach out and help. And finding if there's a care calendar that's been put together, finding what that person specifically needs, because you can specify on there, do you need meals? Do you need somebody to walk the dog? Do you need somebody just to run the kids to activities? So finding something you're comfortable with within the realm of what that person actually needs, and do that. It could be something like walking their dog every day that to you may not seem significant, but it means the world to that person. So just finding what language you can help them in is crucial. And pretty much anything you do is going to be helpful, and honoring their space. So respecting them also if they're asking that people not do something, or if they're asking that people give them some time and then they would like some help, then really listening to that. Respect whatever their process is.
And that's good. That's good information, because I think so many of us just feel like, our hands are tied. What do you do? What do you do? I think for me, most people are worried about doing it wrong. But from what I'm hearing is most things are going to be right. Most things are going to be right, and that's good information. How important is it for folks who are going through this grief to find a support group? Because I know counseling is something a little bit different. I mean, you're seeking help from a counselor. But what is the benefit of someone who is grieving, going through the process, or maybe they're coming out of it? How important is a support group for them?
I think especially with grief, support groups can be an essential piece to healing. They have different support groups. So you can have peer support groups, which I think sometimes are the most effective, because it's people in your community that may have gone through the same loss as you have. And so everyone can help shoulder that burden and show that you're not the only one going through it. And they can talk about maybe things that have been helpful for them through the process. And so just knowing that you're not out there alone, I think, is the biggest benefit of support groups. So again, the peer ones are great. You also have counselor-led ones where that counselor has experience with grief, so they can kind of help keep nudging people through the process and help give them strength to get through it. And then you have the individual counseling. There's also online support groups. People find that very helpful, because when you're in the depression phase of grief, you don't want to have to get dressed or take a shower or get out to a group. So if you can have an online support group or a blog that you're a part of, where you can get on there at 2 a.m. and start reading things or sending notes to people, then that's a 24/7 readily accessible support group that people find invaluable.
Well, this has been such great information, Kathleen. I thank you for sharing that with us. How can people get more information about your counseling?
They can go online. So I do have a website. My website is FamilySolutionsCounseling.ga.com. And they can call me. They can also write me an email. So if they have any follow-up questions from this show, then they can certainly send me an email. I can put them in touch with different local people who have support groups if they would like that. And that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Well, thank you. So helpful.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or maybe even a show idea, you can log on to our website at windertv.org. And remember, every time that you invest in or serve our community, you just might become the talk of the town. We'll see you next time.
You're watching Winder Television.